welcome everyone. Or this is our first episode of the Space for Business podcast. My name is Ricardo Marvão. I'm one of the co-founders of BTI. And basically today we're going to talk with Gary Martin. And Gary is today at the International Space University, but before he was doing a lot of stuff in space. And so I wanted to ask first thing to Gary, if you could give us a little bit of background from yourself.
Let's see. Well, thank you very much. I'm happy to be here, Ricardo, and this is a really nice forum. I started at NASA in 1985. My first real kind of position at NASA, I started working on the design of the space station for microgravity experiments. And during that time, we were doing microgravity experiments on the shuttle. So I was kind of a program manager for those experiments in the early 90s. And for trying to look at what we would do on the space station at the time on microgravity. Later than that, I also worked at NASA on the science programs. I worked on the technology and advanced technology programs, and finally ended up at one time the lead for strategy at NASA. It was a title called the Space Architect around 20 years ago, where we had a group of about 70 of the best and brightest around NASA looking at how to get humans out of low Earth orbit and onto the Moon and Mars. And that turned in our work after about 4 years turned into what President Bush put out as the vision for space exploration. So that was a big turn for NASA, that now we could not be just around space station. We say space station's a step to go to the Moon and Mars. Even though everyone always knew that, we actually weren't allowed to say it till the president said we could. So, and then after that, one reason that I'm here talking to you is that I really got interested in space business. At the time, we didn't do much commercial work at NASA with companies. We did some, a lot, well, some, but we really took it up a notch. I went to Silicon Valley and worked at Ames, and we started doing a lot helping companies get started. And then from there, when I retired from NASA in 2017, because of what I had been doing to help companies get started, Luxembourg asked me to come and help them create a sustainable space, commercial space ecosystem, which I thought was an amazing idea. And they really were forward-leaning, and they put resources into this to make this new community that would be self-sustaining. So I went there for 2 years. And all along the time, I've been working with the International Space University because it draws people who want to start companies. It draws people who want to push the boundaries of what's being done in space. And so I get kind of an early look at what's happening in the community that's coming together. And many of our alumni have really been successful in starting great companies. So
yeah, I remember we met actually at the Space Studies program in 2007 in Beijing. It was an amazing SSP.
that was
I still
great.
remember. Yeah, it was great. I was just before the Olympics. There was so many things happening in the city. Plus the language barrier united a lot, I think, the group, but also gave them the liberty, the freedom to actually go and figure out the city and the country. It was, I think, really amazing. And I really, even today, I have a lot of friends from there, and I think the community is amazing. And maybe I'm going to ask you, since we're talking about ISU, if you can explain a little bit about ISU, so that people that are listening, they can understand a little bit better what's the International Space University.
It's a very unique institution. There's nothing like it. It's because I've looked actually, even in other disciplines like oceanography and places like that, you'd think there might be something similar. But ISU is an NGO. It's populated by people many of them are volunteers. And so we go and we try to help people be successful in space. We want to see humanity exploring space and developing space. And it's just a community, a global community who work to try to help that happen. And what we do is we provide educational programs and professional development programs. And we provide people with a network of support. For instance, people looking for jobs in space and looking for people looking for workers. So it was an idea that was brought up by Peter Diamandis and Bob Richards and Todd Hawley when they were in their 20s in the late 80s. And they caught the eye of Arthur C. Clarke and other people that said they wanted ISU, the International Space University, to be a beacon globally so that people who really wanted to work their life into space, and they were so interested in it that they would come and meet each other. And then they could collaborate in the future, they could form companies, they could help each other. And now we have over 5,000 alumni. 6 of them have been heads of agencies or are still heads of agencies. We've had 3 astronauts. We have so many companies. I think the last count we did was 127 new space companies in 27 countries. And
yeah, it's amazing. Amazing organization. And so, I mean, one of the reasons why we're here also is we're building now this new academic program called Space for Business, which is a partnership between the Rotterdam School of Management, St. Gallen University, and the Nova School of Business and Economics, with a collaboration from the European Space Agency, and a strong partnership here with the International Space University. And we're really glad to have you guys on board. I think it's going to be an amazing program. And with you guys, I think just goes a notch, a level up. And so I think it's important that we talk about, I mean, since we're doing this Space for Business, and when we talk about space and people think about a lot of the times engineering, why is the business part so important for this space sector?
Well, actually, when I was giving you a quick rundown of the things I was doing in my career, one of the things I've always wanted was a sustainable exploration development. And if you look at what NASA was trying to do, you know, once we were, well, just in the last 20 years, I won't even go back in past history, but when we did the vision for space exploration, we were going to go to the moon, Mars, and beyond. It was something that we were always going to grow. Humanity was going to move off this planet in a sustainable way. But we didn't do it in it was mostly a kind of government program 20 years ago still. And then, you know, we had a change in management at NASA, and they decided just to focus on the moon and took out all the scars of the program that would let us go to Mars. And then we had a change of presidents, and we weren't going to go anywhere for a long time. And then towards the end of the Obama administration, we were going to go to an asteroid. And then we have the Trump administration, and we're going back to the moon again. And the only reason I go through that is to say that when governments do things that take a long time, the politics change, and it brings instability in the programs. And while I was a space architect, I had a study done about how do we make sustainability, how do we make these architectures sustainable? And the way it came back was you get a positive feedback loop if you can make money in space. And that's actually what drove the later part of my career into focusing on how companies can get started and be successful. Because the more money you're making in space, you're not dependent on the governments anymore. And the governments will help you because they want you to make money. They want you to pay taxes. They want you to have workers working. And so there's this positive feedback loop where it's not totally on the shoulders of the government that's going to change its mind every now and then. So the more people we have making money in space, or more people making money from space assets, you know, you can do that on the ground with your computer, is the better. And so it really will open up space.
But what do you feel changed over the last few years? Because we've seen a lot of people talk about space over the last decades, but a lot of it was, I mean, public programs, like you were talking about NASA. But now we have a lot of private programs and private companies working, and we see the big Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and others working in the space industry. What do you feel changed over the last decade?
I would say first it was billionaires putting a lot of money into it. It was also that we retired the shuttle at NASA and we put a lot of money into private companies, over $36 billion, I think, over the probably the last 15 years. And that's a lot of money going into private hands. And those, so you're building a launcher, but you also need all the subsystems and all the parts. So more and more private companies were being able to hire people and do things. But I think the big thing is that we brought the bar down to being part of this because technology is better. The invention of the small sat 20 years ago, there were no small sats.
Right.
In fact, I had a report from NASA in 2007 to tell my boss at Ames Research Center to stop spending his own money on our research money on small sats because NASA never needed them.
Right.
So that shows you the kind of, when things, it takes a while to change, but now everything's small sat. You can do so much and it's a lot cheaper. You can put more up. And because they're cheaper, you can try new technologies. We have new sensors. It's really kind of an explosion. And it's not just small sats. And now we have companies making their own space stations. And if you have space stations, then you need companies to help do whatever you're going to do. And if you're going to do tourism, you're going to want the tourists are going to want to have nice furniture and they're going to have food and they want to be resupplied and all this stuff. You create this whole infrastructure of activity.
Yeah, I think that's the beauty of it. I remember when I went to the SSP in Beijing at ISU, and I saw all these diversity of skills. That there was a guy that was designing. He was an interior designer for spacecrafts, and I was like, really? And then there was the guy that was a doctor for the astronauts, and the guy that he was a cook, but only for food for space, and it was so different. And I think it's important that we clarify that there's so many possible jobs in space, and the diversity, especially now with the private sector coming in. I think it's so amazing to see so many possibilities. And so that's why I feel that a program like this one, the Space for Business, is so interesting because it brings in so many people that are in business or that are entrepreneurs, or they are maybe already in the space sector, but they want to get into the space, but in different fields. And there's a great possibility there, especially now in this point.
Oh, absolutely. That's what we see at ISU. In fact, we even tell people one of the reasons we have our professional development programs is if you're in mid-career and maybe you are an artist or you are a non-engineer, but you really wanted to do something in space, it really got your energy levels up. We show these kinds of people where there's opportunity. Many of the people who start companies are not space engineers. They're managers who want to do things in space, or they're accountants, or they're just people with a big idea and are willing to put time and effort into building their company. And they need to know what the landscape looks like. So organizations and your new program is going to be able to show those people that, and that's certainly what we also help you on that one. We're going to try to show what the landscape looks like and where the resources are to make those changes happen in people's careers.
And I think also the collaboration from all these people, plus the fact that a lot of these people come from different nationalities with different skills and different cultural mindsets, helps a lot to drive into something really amazing in terms of product or service. I think also looking at for instance, the Space for Business and the fact that it's going to happen in 3 different countries it starts in Switzerland, it goes to Portugal, and then it finishes in the Netherlands, and then it actually finishes at Aztec, at the ESA center. I think that mix of people will also be very, very important to get the right mindset into people, because space, I mean, look at the space station. It's built by I don't know how many nations, and then there's so many experiments made there with so many countries participating, and it's amazing. Even in times of war, different nations that would basically on Earth be fighting uh, still collaborate in space.
Absolutely. Yes. I
Yeah.
mean, we had during the Cold War, we had the Apollo Soyuz program, you know, again, with Russia and the US working together to show you could do something peaceful in space. I think it was a great symbol. No, it's very exciting. I think this is the right time for more and more people to come in and start businesses. As I told you, I can't help you enough. So hopefully that when you learn about us through your program, that together we'll help a whole lot of companies get started.
Yeah.
And that will make it easier. The more companies get started, the better. And this is the right time. If you look at the explosion of private money coming in
Right.
to this market, and it's no longer just a government game. It's really just private investors who are serious people know that they're going to get their investment back. And that's why they're putting this money in. And quite frankly, the country of Luxembourg, who decided that they wanted to make a sustainable space, commercial space ecosystem, did all their own studies. And they're a country of bankers. And so
Right.
they know this is not a lark or not a they looked at what risks were involved, and they said this is something that's worthwhile the investment of the country to create these kinds of opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, when we were designing the program, this also something that came to us and felt right, and it also was validated by. I remember listening to this U.S. professor from this top university in U.S. and he had gone to this first conference. I mean, his first conference about space or new space and private companies. Doing building stuff in space, and he was talking, and he talked at the end of the conference, and I was listening in, and he was talking about, I mean, it's amazing that you guys are building this, but who's thinking about these new business models, and are there any universities or academics actually studying this so that you can replicate this instead of we're building this and wish us luck. You know, it's like maybe having some universities looking at what kind of new business models, what kind of new ways of building businesses with these technologies and in this sector are able to be done and then replicated. And so he was thinking, okay, we should build something focused on business. It makes total sense. And like this, more people will come, will learn, and will use what we find out. And because this sector just keeps on growing. Right now, it just keeps on growing.
It really does.
Yeah.
Yeah. And engineers can learn about how to create a business, as well as people who are non-engineers can learn about what kinds of things they could do with space. So I'm excited for the people that you're going to bring in and the people that we have. Exposing each of the communities together to each other will only help collaboration and development of space.
Yeah, this is something that I wanted to ask you is, okay, you have all these different projects going into space, but I'm sure, I mean, it's like a movie or the theater where you see the actor on TV or the actor on the scene on the theater, but then you look at how the whole thing was produced and how all the technicians and the movie director and the screenwriter and all these things in space is the same thing, right? You have all these other jobs that nobody actually sees because they're in the background. But whenever one person has this idea, you're actually creating a lot of direct and indirect jobs to actually make that dream a reality, right?
Absolutely. In fact, that's one of the things that people are looking at. Like if you're looking at the possibility of people mining resources on the moon, this is a really big one. And they're talking about trillions of dollars in the future being recovered from that. But if you're working on the moon, let's say you're working on a moon base, maybe probably months or something to extract this resource and put it so people can use it, you're going to want to go home and you're going to want to have a beer. You're going to want to have a pizza. You're going to want a comfortable living quarters. You're going to want entertainment. You're going to want, art and maybe even living plants growing. So just as you start listing all those things that you take for granted down here, everything is a business. You know, the people who make furniture on the moon are going to make a business. People who make food on the moon or raise plants to make food on the moon are a business. Everything, recycling the material, because you have to recycle in space. It's much easier than starting everything new again. So clothing, keeping clean. I mean, there's no limit to things we take for granted on the Earth. But as humanity moves on a sustainable way to the moon, maybe someday to Mars, those are all businesses. And it's just blows your mind. It's like, what do you like to do? You can probably make a business case out of it, especially as things start getting set up. I mean, right now, the Chinese are talking about going to the moon. The US is talking about going to the moon. ESA, people, that's like a focus. But before that, low Earth orbit with private stations and even space station as it moves into maybe a more commercial era, those people are already starting to offer services like satellite servicing, refueling. I mean, there's things like that are private businesses. Recycling material that's stuck in, that is debris in low Earth orbit. Many companies are looking at that. You know, it's amazing opportunity right now. It's just hard to describe how much opportunity there is.
So, Gary, tell me something. Okay, we're talking about all these things, and I think the people listening, they go like, okay, but this is so science fiction. It's so like the final frontier. But I think it's important that we reflect also on the downstream part and what could be used on Earth using space tech. And I think one of the reasons why we also built this Space for Business program is actually to how can you help the businesses that are already happening on Earth, could be agriculture or fishing or healthcare or whatever, and how can you use space technology? Because otherwise you're always thinking about the moon, Mars, and rocks, asteroids, and you think, no, this is not for me. But actually, there is a lot more opportunity to use space tech on Earth. So what I wanted to ask you is if you can talk a little bit about that and maybe give some examples of things that you heard of businesses that are using space tech that could be very interesting for the people listening and for them to understand, okay, actually space tech is very widely used on Earth as well.
Oh, it's everywhere. People talk about what would a day be like if you didn't have space assets.
Right.
And all you need in this area to make a business is a computer and understand what kind of sensor data you have coming down, that some you might have to pay for, some is free. But you can, I've seen people make all kinds of apps to help people out from GNS, your global navigation and where you are. Very clever people can put data sets together and come up with whole new life enhancing activity. In fact, they give awards for that, I think, with the Cassini data in Europe. And so farmers can use the sensor data to look at disease in their crop. They can look at when they need watering. If you're in a dry area, you don't want to waste water. You want to see what the soil moisture is, and you can do that from space. You can see if your competitor has more cars during the day in their parking lot than you do. And you can see maybe even where, how you might want to improve. I mean, why, maybe it's the location. You can, we've done things with farmers and vintners, wineries. The global warming data, it shows how, what might happen to areas, where would they grow vines. And it takes a long time for a vine to mature. So actually vines in California, people are planting new crops on trying to anticipate the global warming, because that's when they'll be optimal in a few years in the future. And so they're getting a heads up by using space data, by us constantly looking at the climate. But people look at the oceans. There's companies that started out doing like radio signal activities are now able to do very precise weather, microclimates in people who are in mountains and in interesting areas where weather is hard to predict, can now use a lot of these assets for microclimate that really help them in their production of food or whatever it is they're working on. So again, it's like I was saying, it's unbelievable how much opportunity there is out there, and new and better sensors are coming out all the time. The use of hyperspectral sensors can tell all kinds of things about pollution and material moving through the atmosphere and on the ground, in the waterways, and use that information for whatever it is that you're doing. I mean, it's
I remember a couple of years ago, I saw these guys that launched a private CubeSat. And what they were trying to see was, would it be possible to do like a Google Maps, but with the video instead of a static image, And what can you actually get from there? Because if you would see like a city alive, with all the traffic from the cars and the airplanes and all these things that and how you actually understand much better, for instance, a city, or even if you want to check out your neighborhood or something like this, and how the movement is, maybe for real estate, is this a very is there a lot of movement in the city, in the streets where I want to buy a house, little things. But it was amazing to see these guys developing, and it was a very simple example, but it just drove my imagination to like, okay, if this becomes a reality, so many businesses can, just like today. I mean, you see Google Maps is something that we use on a daily basis, even to check if the supermarket is open or not, or the pharmacy or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's amazing to see how one of these businesses can drive a whole lot of new businesses to be inside that kind of platform. So I think it's really amazing to see. Another question that I wanted to ask you is, okay, we're still in the pandemic, and we're all like remote, or most of us, and we've seen also the drive of people to be more like, okay, even if I have to go back to the office, at least I want to have a few days a week that I want to stay home or in a co-work or whatever. I don't want to be all the time in the office, right? But also we've seen over the last few years, and especially now, big announcement from Starlink to actually, okay, this is going to be like global coverage. I think it's from August onwards. So that means, I mean, you can have broadband anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
So where if your boss gives you the opportunity to be remote, and if you can work in the most remote island and still have broadband, I mean, the possibilities can be gigantic, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. In fact, many of these businesses are remote and are not co-located. I think, for the hardware aspects, you do need, but even companies that have a fair amount of hardware build themselves as data companies who have put small telescopes in space. They're not selling the small telescopes in space. They're selling the data that all these telescopes get, or all the data from the CubeSat sensors that are being put up there now. And there's a lot of work in trying to figure out how much information you can get out of these huge data sets. And then when you combine them, you even get bigger insights into certain problems and how to deal with them. So again, I think we're seeing more and more money coming into this area, the commercial space, each year because of people with really innovative ideas coming up and being very successful. Companies I have known that have started from ISU alumni have already exited and on to do new things. And people starting in their 20s, they just have a big idea, and that's a great time.
And you feel like the target for instance, the Space for Business program, what do you feel would be the best target? I mean, people listening in, who do you feel would be the best people to come in? If you had like a call for a certain type of generation or skills, or to come to a program like this one, who would you call on?
I think the people who are very serious about starting a or not even very serious, who just want to find out about starting a space business and learn about the basics. I think that's what you really need. So what they can do with their idea and find out where the ideas are from. There are many governments that have patents that are just waiting for people to make a business out of them. And that ESA does that, the European Space Agency, and they actually help with technology transfer. So you really only need to have a willingness to want to work in space or work with space assets. And then you can learn about how do you do that.
Yeah, because you were talking right now about learn about the basics. And I think it's important to say that the program, the Space for Business program, also gives you like the basics about space. And actually, I think it's a module that ISU will complement and will help on that. But I think it's important that people understand the basics, so that, okay, if I understand the basics of how space and subsystems and the engineering work, then I can understand much better how to actually build a business on top of that.
And that's what we teach. We try to make sure everyone understands at a certain level, like a lawyer would understand how a rocket works, or a scientist would understand the issues in the Outer Space Treaty that you need to deal with. And even though there's a lot going on in space, there's a fair amount of things it's good to know, so you're not surprised if you want to start a business. So that's kind of how we'll help together in our partnership. That we have this global kind of look of what's going on around the world, because our communities all around the world. So we can bring in aspects of what's changing in China and what's happening in South America and things like that. So we can kind of show what the playing field looks like.
So if you have this like more global, broader view also of what's happening, because of also the trends that you see on the alumni, and how much, because ISU also, yes, the Space Studies program actually happens in a different country every year. Yeah. And actually next year it's going to be in Lisbon. So
it will be in Lisbon next year.
Yeah, I'm really excited about that. It's going to be an amazing program, I'm sure. But I think if you have all these like broader perspective, where do you see like the biggest trends for the future when you look at in space and space for business? Where do you see the biggest trends right now for people that are entering now, so that they have like okay, if there's like 2-3 areas that make sense for the future, if you're thinking, especially if you're thinking long term, where do you see the opportunities?
Well, I've mentioned a number of them, but I think one of the opportunities that's an easy one, a low bar to really get involved in, is to figure out new ways of using all the data that's already available to you from the companies who are putting up all these sensors. Like I said, some companies you have to buy the data, but it's probably worth it if you have a product that, because they're more interested in supplying the data, and as opposed to the apps, many of these companies, because they like the hardware and they knew that this was valuable. They want people who can take their data and make money out of it, because it's a win-win. So you'll get a lot of support from those companies. The other thing is looking at some of the new technology coming out, and or even looking at the technology that we call spin-off from space. If you learn about what space companies need, you might see technology uses on the ground. NASA, we were always looking at that. Like what is, if we do this new coating for thermal, what can we do on the ground? We've done a lot of that kind of work. Even those little accelerometers in your car, that's everywhere, ubiquitous, comes from some of the technology that was developed early on that we needed to understand the accelerations happening in a spacecraft. And so, and actually and small computers were a necessity for what we had to do in space. That became a whole market. In the beginning, people couldn't figure out, why would you want your own computer? There's lots of quotes like that. So there's a lot of this technology, and this is where the governments actually have helped. They put a lot of money into high-risk technology development in all around the world. And people, if you're aware of that, you can take that and possibly make whole new products on the earth. And it's not really, but you have to be aware of what they're doing and what they're building. And so this awareness comes from, knowing where would you get all this information from? And so there's a number of conferences and things like that ISU is at. And we'll probably see you there at the conferences, I think, especially the ones in Europe. And then in trying to show people what's available.
Right.
So the areas are the technology and all the data. And I actually think there's a lot of business that can be done with the data that's already being produced.
Yeah. I remember Peter Diamandis was always saying, like, today an individual can do things that 20, 30 years ago, only governments were able to do.
Oh, yeah.
Because the technology and the resources needed was just not possible for a person or a small team. And so I think how do you see that driving? Do you see that this will continue this path?
Oh, I actually do. I mean, we're going to see, I think in the next couple of months, the first people going suborbital into space. So this picture I have behind me, it's a Zoom thing, but you can imagine many people over the next couple of years are going to go up above those clouds, way above those clouds, and come back down. And they'll be looking down on Earth and see the curvature that you see behind my head in these, for these companies that are going to offer these rides. Well, once they see that, many of them, and it may inspire other people, they have these private space stations, and tourism and research will really start to bloom because they can be produced at large rates. So if there's a need for tourism in low Earth orbit, or need for research in low Earth orbit from the things we found out on space station, all they will need is services. Like I was saying earlier, if you can think of, you have this capability. Well, no one wants to build everything vertically. Well, some people do, but most people don't. And so they want subcontractors to provide them with services, and all those are businesses.
Right. Yeah, it's amazing to see what's coming up. I also wanted to ask you a little bit about. Okay, the space for business. We'll talk about, of course, the space basics. We'll talk about the business side. We'll talk about also the leadership part, because if you're like an independent company and you want to understand the vision, strategy, and leadership, and how to actually convince a team of people to actually drive that company into a success, or at least a business that then can propel itself to other countries. And I think it's very important that people understand that, okay, this is going to be over, I think, 5-6 months, the program itself. And we're going to have, and just to explain a little bit about this, we're going to have also because of the pandemic, we're going to have 3 weeks locally where the students will be first in Switzerland. It will start at late November. And then there will be an online part where there's going to be a lot of other discussions and talking about group work. And then there's going to be another part in January, February in Portugal, also face-to-face. Then we're going to have another part which will be online. And then we finish at the Netherlands. And I wanted to ask you, I mean, we're building this space for business program, but we actually were expecting to have, I mean, other people, if for 10 years we've been working more and more or seeing more and more of these private businesses, why haven't there been more educational programs also thinking about this? Because there's so many areas that you see AI or machine learning and suddenly pops up everywhere and you have programs. So why do you think education and educational institutions take so long to enter into this area? Is it because it's hard, or is it because they only see this as like, this is engineering and that's it? It's because in the end, you were talking about research a while ago and how important that is. So it is important to bring the academics also to this world, right?
Yes.
And even the academics in the business world, I mean, in the business schools, how can these academics from the business school enter into this? Because if you have so many students working at the university and studying at the university, how can you bring also, you were talking about data, you were talking about how do you analyze data. I can imagine how many master students' theses and PhD theses can be actually developed over all this data and all this connection that you have in, for instance, a business school that actually receives people in working in the space sector. And I'm just trying to, I don't know if I'm going in the right direction, but I'm trying to ask you, how do you feel we can bring in more academics and more educational institutions into this sector?
You asked a really important question. You know, where is everyone? I think everyone goes to established universities, but those established universities are having more and more space-oriented programs, but not so much in the business area. And I think that's why you guys kind of have found a nice area that needs to be explored, because most of the space stuff's done in the engineering and in the scientific areas. And then there are some crossover programs, but you're right, it's not very many. We saw that when we were trying to create a new program in Luxembourg. But the traditional universities are not necessarily interdisciplinary. And what this really requires is a lot of interdisciplinary thinking. Even though you're not an engineer, you're using new technology, and how you got to understand enough of it to know how to take advantage of the data that's coming out of it, or the activity that it produces. So I think we're in a transition period. There's more and more money going in, and I think more and more educational and professional programs to make people aware of what's available in space are going to happen. I see in the last couple of years much more happening than was 20 years ago. I think we're just at a time where things are changing. And the whole idea of space itself, by definition, is multidisciplinary. You have to know a lot of different, to take advantage of the opportunity, you need to understand, the business aspects, you need to understand the science and the sensors and the constraints of being in space. Space is a totally different environment than the Earth's surface. So but it's not hard. I mean, it's not like you don't need to be a physicist to understand it. You just need to know, that you can't do things like you do on the surface, but you can do them. You just got to figure out how to do them in a different way.
Yeah. Okay, Gary, I think it was an amazing conversation. Thank you so much. I know that you guys are now, ISU has an SSP now running, and I know that you're in it right now.
Yes.
So I wish you luck for this SSP and all the students that are there. It was a great conversation. Just for you guys that are listening in and want to know more about the Space for Business program, you can check it online, and it's spaceforbusiness.eu. And if you want to apply or talk to us and ask questions, we're more than welcome to answer and to provide all the answers that for your doubts. Again, Gary, thanks so much for the conversation. It was great, and I hope you enjoyed. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you, Ricardo. I did too. And I look forward to our partnership.
Yes.
International Space University and this Space for Business will be a great partnership.
Yes, and we will see you for sure. I mean, I know at least that I'll be in Switzerland when it starts. I mean, I want to see this thing starting.
That'd be very exciting.
Gary,
See you.
thanks.
Thanks, Ricardo.
Bye. Thank
Bye.
you.